Hello, this is Lee Dale, and I am here to discuss storyboarding and planning out your project. I teach multimedia at a community college, and I've given this lecture quite a few times, although I'll definitely spin it for all you educators out there. So, storyboarding, how to plan your project, and how to do it successfully. We're going to be discussing exactly what storyboarding is. We're going to discuss linear versus non-linear narratives in games in terms of storyboarding, and I'll give you just a little bit of a how-to and a bunch of resources so that you can run to your offices and try it as soon as possible. So first of all, let's talk about what you do before you start storyboarding, and that's just sort of brainstorming. You can use the storyboarding process to do some brainstorming, definitely, but sometimes you need something a little bit less structured. You know, you're just trying to figure out what it is you want to do. So myself, I'm a digital kind of gal, so I always go digital as soon as possible. I really like Bubble Us, and that's this tool. It's a brainstorming tool, and basically what it lets you do is it lets you create little bubbles, and you can create brand new bubbles, type. You can create child bubbles, sibling bubbles, whatever you want to call them. It's a very free form tool. Very nice. It allows you, once you sign in, you can share your bubbles with others. You can take a screenshot of it. You can print it, and so on. It's a very, very nice tool. And Bubble Us, very nice tool, like I said. So you can also just go with the old-fashioned bullet points, just writing a description of what it is you want to do. Write down, now, something that I have found that really, really helps me, write down the things that you know you want to include. It's like they get stuck in your head, you know. So write those things down. If you, for example, really, really want to include an anagram, I want to say quiz, no, an anagram puzzle or something like that, you know you want to use that, write that down, you know. Clear it out of your brain so that you can get on with the real brainstorming, and then you can integrate it back in a little bit later. So that's what you want to do before you really start structuring things. Oh, sorry, it's a little bit windy outside. So a lot of people, they just sort of get hung up with storyboarding. And there are a few things to remember as you're storyboarding and as you're brainstorming. One of them is just move forward. You know, write something down. Put something down on paper or on the canvas or wherever it is you're doing it, so that you can look at it, you can sort of argue about it, you can show it to somebody, you can brainstorm about it so that you have something to discuss. Just get on it and do something. You can always change it later. I mean, the further into the process you get, the harder it is to change, but still, you always have that option of going back and changing it. If it's too overwhelming, if what you're thinking about is way too overwhelming, break it down. You know, break it down as much as you can. Cut it into smaller pieces, discuss the pieces, brainstorm about the smaller pieces. If planning out an entire ARG is too overwhelming, focus on what websites you might want to use. Do you want to use websites? If you don't, then there you go. You've already simplified it some for yourself. What technology do you want to use? So break it down as much as you can. If it's still too overwhelming, you're thinking, oh my, how am I going to do this? Back off on the scope if you have to. You know, if you were thinking, well, I can do 3 weeks in this, well, maybe 3 weeks isn't the right length for you to start out with. So back off a little bit. Keep in mind, you know, these things tend to be very flexible. You have to be flexible. So, yeah, let's see. So what is your target? That's the next thing you definitely have to figure out. You sort of have to get a core statement in mind, an idea of exactly where you're aiming. And you can adjust this throughout the entire process, but you have to have that core statement that says, okay, this is what I'm aiming towards doing, so that any time a shiny tool or shiny website distracts you, you can say, will this help me with my core purpose, the reason that I'm doing this, whatever it is, video for my students, or this game for my students, whatever it is. So, for example, you know, this narrative will set up the rest of the game. So you're planning a narrative. It will be a series of pictures and a PowerPoint with my voiceover. And here's the story that I'm thinking about doing. Just a basic statement of what you're aiming at, maybe with an idea of how long the time period would be. So you need to have this core statement or this rationale, this thesis statement, whatever you want to call it, before you go much further, because you don't want to go scattershot. You definitely want to figure out where you're going. Alright, so another thing to think of, obviously, we are educators, is learning objectives. What do you want to hit on? You know, what do you want students to do? What do you want them to get out of the game or the video or the piece of media that you're producing, whatever it is? One thing that I found that I loved was, you know, the Bloom's taxonomy. Well, there are a bunch of versions out there now with digital verbs, and I liked a bunch of these, so I decided to include it. So tagging, uploading, blogging, Googling. Students will upload Flickr images of process through the game during the museum visit for discussion and analysis later. For example, each student will upload a video of themselves speaking and greeting in Latin, as well as a brief description of how they would present themselves in the chosen time period. So don't be afraid to start integrating these as you go through. Figure out what your target is. Okay, so another thing to start thinking about as soon as you can is, what assumptions are you making? You know, what do your students have access to? Will their parents object? You know, if, for example, you want students to take pictures of each other. Well, is that going to happen on the school grounds? Will it have supervision? How will they access cameras or phones with which to do that, for example? Will they have access to cameras and phones? Will they need access to the internet? Do they have access at home? Children and just people in general nowadays have access to a lot more, but you can't always make that assumption. You always have to start thinking about this pretty early on, especially if you're making something like a game where some of the plot points definitely hinge on if they have these things. So that's just something to plot out as well. And refine this as you go. You definitely refine all of this as you go. This is just some things to think about as you're working through it. So let's get to the meat of it. Let's actually talk about linear traditional storyboards. And here are a couple of examples here. Basically, what we're talking about now is linear. So each event happens one after another. There's not really a whole lot of choice. There was some discussion in the forums about games, and even some games are very linear. I mentioned that we're playing through Drake's Deception on the PS3. It is very linear. I mean, you basically have two choices. Either you do what they tell you to do it fast enough, or you die. There's not a whole lot else there. It's definitely not like your Grand Theft Auto or your other sandbox games at all. So linear storyboards help you plot that sort of thing out. And it's a very good resource here. This is the same resource I use with my students. Let me see if I can bring it up. So this is the same resource I use with my students. This is a website. It's been out there for forever. They discuss exactly what a storyboard is, and they give you several examples here. Basically, it visually tells the story of an animation or video or some sort of media panel by panel. It's kind of like a comic book, and you can see that they have some specific things that they recommend that you put into the storyboard, but really each storyboard is unique. They talk about storyboard language here, close-up shot, a dissolve, a fade, high camera angle. These are usually only used if you're doing video. Storyboards are used for a lot more than video, but these are some really good things for you to think about if you are doing video or machinima. Let's see, so some examples that they give. Really close-up, extreme close-up of an eye opening, pupil dilates. Sounds like a great beginning to an art there, doesn't it? Camera movement, point of view, so it's point of view of the creature moving through the forest. Cuts, video cuts, cut to black, and so on. So you can see how they use these simple little squares. And I mean, yes, there are storyboard artists that make things absolutely gorgeous. I love the one down here. There's not a word spoken, but you can see all of the action going on. Yes, I mean, this stuff is all great and all. But, you know, my theory is that as long as it gets the idea across so you can explain what it is you're thinking about doing to somebody else using the storyboard, it's good enough. This is a planning document. It is not artwork in and of itself. So if all you can do is little stick figures, fine. You know, as long as it gets the point across. That's the idea. So here we have camera movement or character movement here. So it's following the character, and little stick figures. You gotta love the stick figures. So I think TV, movies, plays, this is how a lot of those are plotted out. And this is generally how it's done for a video and animations. If you want storyboard templates, the easiest way, frankly, to get a storyboard template is to go to your favorite search engine, go to the image search, and type in storyboard. You'll get oodles of storyboard templates in varying shapes and sizes, and really, it doesn't matter which one, because remember, the point is you want to get something down on paper so that you could show it to others, discuss it, and so on. You can see other examples of storyboards as well. So it's a really good way of getting an idea of how exactly storyboarding works. Usually you get this linear progression from box to box, and they'll have lines below discussing what audio might be in the scene, what actions the camera might be taking, what lines might be spoken at that point, what music might be going on. So it's a good way to see how different people do things like that. There's also there's a screenshot of the screen I just showed you. There's also a really nice tool out there called StoryboardThat.com, and of course I'm going to find an online tool for everything. This is a nice little tool. I've used it once or twice with my students when I've taught a little bit of video editing. It's a very nice, it's drag and drop, so you can move around your little characters, and you can, whoops, now he's floating off into the ceiling. You can rotate them. There we go, now he's sideways. You can put different backgrounds behind them. It's somewhat limited, but it's a heck of a lot faster than drawing it yourself. So it's not bad. It's not bad. They have a paid version for educators. It's something like $25 a year, I think it is, and it gives you more options. They have pricing on the page, but they give you a few storyboards that you can make. Page, and it is very drag and drop. Very drag and drop, which is very nice for students. It's a little bit limited in the little characters you can use, but it's not bad. They're kind of cute. So StoryboardThat.com is another option. So again, a lot of the considerations that you'd be thinking about here is like location of your actors, if this is the kind of storyboard you're making. What's in the background, how they move, what sounds are going on, what music might be going on, camera movement, if there's voiceover, and so on. I mean, again, if this is kind of intimidating to you, keep it simple. There is nothing wrong with using a very simple tool at all. I've seen instructors very successfully use little stick figure comic books, very much like this. Just got to get the point across, right? All right, so that's linear storyboards. You have this progression left to right, very simple. That's linear storyboards. So let's get into something a little bit more complicated now. Okay, yeah, there's this storyboarding requirements that you got to think through. But let's get into something a little bit more complicated now. That's nonlinear storyboarding. Nonlinear as in things don't always go in the same progression every single time. And usually you'll see this used with websites, wireframes for websites, plotting out how a game will work, obviously, because games are not always linear. Interactive fiction, just something we've discussed in the MOOC, and most alternate reality games. So the trick here is to break it down. You start with the big general thoughts and plans, and then you start drilling down. You have to consider the types of media, of course, in your learning objectives. Have to figure out the general chronological, what order it will go to in general, and the general to specific. The parts to really think about first are the non-linear parts. I mean, usually you have an idea of what you want to do for the linear things. Students will arrive at a certain location, and then they'll watch a video clip of somebody ranting on a video about some specific subject, and then they'll go and they'll speak with this person and gather that piece of data. That's pretty linear. That's pretty linear. But sometimes you'll have a bunch of linear chunks where students can go and do that, or they can do this. So there's this little decision point there where they have to figure out where they're going to go next. And so you have to kind of get that idea of, okay, well, they have this option or they have this option. And one of the best ways to do that is with something like this, is with a flow chart, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. There are a bunch of tools, of course, and resources that I've gathered. There's still going to be parts that are linear, like I said. Make sure that you're using the right medium for each piece of the information and or puzzle, by the way. So just because you find a shiny toy, and I have to tell myself this a lot, just because you find a shiny toy doesn't mean it's the best thing for the puzzle or for that piece of information. And sometimes there are easier ways of getting the information across. Sometimes making a video is faster than typing up a huge paper for them to read. And sometimes they're much more likely to watch the video, too. So, to break down these non-linear parts here, there are a few different tools that we can take a look at. And you will have linear chunks. A lot of people still use paper and pencil. There's nothing wrong with paper and pencil as long as you understand what you wrote, and you can show others and explain, well, first students will do this, and then they'll have the opportunity to pick from these 3 clues, which will take them into these possible directions. Fine. As long as somebody can understand it and it's clear in your head, that's fine. Word can work very well. It has the shapes in it, as does PowerPoint. They have flow charting tools is what they have. And they're pretty straightforward. They can get a little frustrating to work with, but they're fairly straightforward. And of course, me with my websites, I have to show you a couple of websites because they're awesome. So we have, excuse me, we have Glyphy. I love this one. So your starting shape is usually round. Usually that's where you start or stop. So this one says, "Where's your lunch?" Somebody ate it. That's where. And a rectangular shape is usually a step. You see these little arrows in between that show the progression. Okay, it says, "Decide whether you can go nuts based on suspect relative seniority to you." And so this is a decision diamond here. This is where they can choose to go one way or the other. And I didn't make this, by the way. This is from Glyphy. I love this. So if you can go nuts, then you go to this next decision point. If you cannot, no, you're screwed. You just administer a dirty look, make the next sandwich with dog food and thumbtacks, and just wait. I love that. And then you have your next flow arrow here. Yes, vengeance is thine. So basically, it takes you through this series of steps. And keep in mind, I mean, you probably want to start pretty simple when you're going through your very first and designing your very first game. You want to start pretty simple. You want to gather feedback as much as you can. I mean, you don't want to pester them with questions entirely all the way through, but you always want to gather some feedback, because if somebody says, "Oh yeah, it was really easy," they might not have gotten the information out of it that they really needed. You might need to torture them a little bit more. Anyway, so this is a really good tool for diagramming that out. And keep in mind also, like you saw on my little, let's see, where did it go here? You can have it where it branches out to 2 and then comes back to 1 again. So, and you see that a lot in interactive fiction. So it doesn't mean that you have to have this huge branching series of decisions. You don't have to start there. You can start yourself pretty small. Let me get back to Glyphy. So anyway, so this is Glyphy. It's very drag and drop. You can resize and type and all sorts of things, and share, edit. It's a very nice, it's your usual flexible Web 2.0 website. It's very nice to use. Okay, so you want to break it down, and break it down a lot. Break it down until it's pretty granular. And it's a good point here to start thinking about, okay, well, am I going to have a fake Facebook page? Am I going to have them blog about their experiences, or make YouTube videos? Or, it's a really good place to start brainstorming about that. Okay. So there are the symbols that I was discussing again. You have the ellipse or the oval, which is the start or end of a process. Flow line or direction. Rectangles, a step in the process. And your diamond, your decision diamond there. So basically, this is to give you an idea. I love this one. Basically, this is to give you an idea of some planning tools that you can use so that you can sort of grapple with this overarching idea. Okay, well, how do I bring a game into the classroom? How do I shoot a video or plan out a video so that it actually looks like I planned it and didn't just point a camera at something as some people are wont to do. Okay, so enough storyboarding. Let's shoot something or design something. This is to give you an idea of what the tools are available, how to plan various things. I'm going to have additional resources for you. I'll provide I want to say a handout. Yeah, we'll call it a handout. And I'll go ahead and I'll make sure to share a link with a bunch of other tools for you and examples of other people who are working with storyboarding. So thank you very much for listening and putting up with my boring little PowerPoint here. And I hope you got some valuable information out of it. Thank you.